Today on Odyssey House Journals, we have a guest who I admire greatly, who has accomplished great things, who is a woman, I think, who could accomplish anything she puts her mind to. So, welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle. My guest co-host is Destiny Garcia. And our guest today, the woman who can do anything, right? January Riggin. So, you're an amazing person. We had you on a podcast years and years ago.
Yes.
When you were just sort of in the infancy stages of your nonprofit,
Yeah.
Soap to Hope.
Yeah, I think it was still a service project.
Yeah, and so describe how it started out and why you got involved, because you set out to help the same kind of people in the situation you had been in.
Yeah, my story, obviously there's a lot of series of events that triggered the nonprofit, and like I said, it was a service project, but I wanted to work with women at risk that are vulnerable of being targeted for grooming, sex trafficking, exploitation, pimping, or our runaway homeless youth that are on the streets. And I wanted to find an avenue how to get to that population. Because
you had experienced that.
Yeah, and that's part of my story. Yeah, and so and at this time I already had 11 years in recovery when I started this, and that piece of my story came out. I think a lot of us come into recovery and we get desperate to, whatever word people want to use, like I'm not this Nazi or black and white thing, clean or sober or whatever, but we get desperate to get clean, right? And I feel like we don't get desperate to heal. Right? We start doing these things of like, I'm told to, go to treatment, go to IOP, or, hit a 12-step meeting. And if you don't have a sponsor, if you don't work steps, you're going to die kind of mentality that goes on. And I did all of those things and my life was great, but I forgot to do the meat and potatoes behind those scenes of like what was really my story. And so when that piece came out, and I call it, that trauma, trigger, whatever response that happened in my life, I had to face that piece of my story, right? Of being exploited and targeted and being sold and selling myself, and really let go of the junkie pride of my story that I was an addict and I was a hustler and I was a G.
I hadn't heard that word, junkie pride.
Yeah, like
it's a real thing.
Yeah, and that I was in prison and this is my armor. And I didn't identify with a really weak, vulnerable little girl that had a bunch of wounds that I was covering, obviously, with addiction and all of those other titles that I took pride in. And so when that story came out, I had to face that. And then I wanted to know how do I work with that population? How do I work in that space? And what could I offer that space, being a survivor or, somebody that's came out of that life, and really facing those challenges, because a lot of women don't. That piece of your story saying that you were trafficked or you had a pimp or you slept with 10 to 20 multiple men a night to survive, or because you were told to, that piece of your story is a lot harder to share than being like, hey, I was sleeping, I was behind the door while my kid was sleeping, shooting up. Like, it's a little bit different. And I know they all have their impact, but to know that somebody had that much power and control over you, and that you really had no resources to get out. And like, even in Utah, we lack like that kind of support system for high-risk sex workers, trafficked victims, exploitation. Like, a lot of it is based around specifically mental health, substance abuse, and like, that is it, right? It's like, and that's like telling someone, if you weren't addicted, you wouldn't have been targeted, and that's untrue, right? That vulnerability is exposed, but traffickers, they target anybody. They don't discriminate, right? And so we have, and I always compare it. It's like telling a female, if you wouldn't have got your husband pissed off, you wouldn't have got hit. That is unfair, right? That is unfair. You cannot. And so I want to be an advocate. And like I said, that was a hard word for me to swallow as survivor. And then I think it became really mainstream, that word, right? Like, because that, like, mainstream media started to, celebrities started to get exploited, or, like, higher end families, their daughters, like, but I wanted my story, right? The girls that never get to report, don't have family support, don't have the money to, fly to these programs or have a rescue, or, operators are looking for them, right? And so Soap to Hope started just as like you going into these vulnerable places. Even
I remember it was so boots on the ground, limited thing that you were doing. You were taking wound care kits and I can't remember
hygiene
and stuff like that, and you were actually like knocking on motel room doors on North Temple, where
we still do.
Oh,
we still do that. We will never lose the grassroots piece of who we are. Now, have we expanded and we're able to create some new avenues? Absolutely. But my outreach absolutely has stayed the same. The Tuesday route has never changed for 6 years. Like what we do and how many hotel doors we knock on and what areas we go into. Now, like I said, it's expand. Like now we go into some camps, or we go into some neighborhoods, or we go into certain locations where we know that girls are working, or that there's, people that are using drugs or IV injection, because now we're in a harm reduction program that provides syringe exchange, safe injection sites, or kits, and then we provide safe sex kits, Plan B, contraceptives, wound care, resources. We have a bus fare program so everybody can get a daily bus pass or a monthly pass with our HCV program. And so we do like a lot of things on the boots on the ground still, and that's still my meat and potatoes. That's like my baby. I don't think anybody can get me to change that, even if they were to either. Like even if somebody came in and offered me millions of dollars, I still wouldn't change that piece.
And what strikes me about, because a lot of people, we have an outreach team at Odyssey. VOA does. The Downtown Alliance has people walking around. What struck me is the population that you pinpointed at that point. You need to build a rapport with them. You can't just be anybody, say, going down on North Temple, knocking on doors, saying, "Hey, do you need some help?"
Yeah.
You got to know these people.
Yeah, I have been out there. I mean, it gets me emotional because they have a story. They have a face. They have a name. They have to me, they're more than the situation that's going on. And I have been out there with them. And even though it's expanded, I'm the executive director, and I still do the outreach. Like I go, my feet hit the pavement every Tuesday, which we're getting ready to do. Right, without fail. I have never missed a Tuesday, and
regardless of weather or anything else.
Oh yeah, even if I'm traveling out of the country, I make it back by Tuesday. So, like I have been able to create this thing, but I see them every week, so they know me and I know their story. Right, and they trust me, and I have part of their story. Now, everybody's story is different. We know that from addiction, and we know that from trauma and mental health, and that's even in that population, right? High-risk sex working, being trafficked, or being pimped, or like consenting, right? We all have our own story, but there's something that happens, that there's these layers that happen in that I think. We're just missing that population, even when they come into into programs, as that piece is really neglected to talk about, right? And then evolved in treatment world where there's like no longer women's facilities, they're co-ed, there's like all these things that it's hard for that story to come out in places. And I know that there's a lot more involvement. I do think people are going back to the separation of like we need women's and men's, and there's more programs opening like John Red's with Reprieve and all of that, like that is like healing for women. It's not based around you have a problem, this happened to you. It's about something happened to you and let's work on that, right? Yeah. And so I think a lot of women in our program, and I think that's why a lot of recidivism happens, is because we address that there was a problem, and if you don't fix that problem, then you're never going to get better. And I think that if we don't start talking to people about what happened to them and what got you to cope with as a situation and what do you need to stay on this path, we're going to see more recidivism or an increase of deaths than we ever have.
There may be people watching this or listening to this who say, wait a minute, this is Utah. We don't have, it's probably a really small problem. Sex workers, trafficking, pimps, we don't have that here.
Yeah, you're right. That is the pushback, right? That is the pushback.
But we do, right?
We do. We have a lot of it.
A big time problem?
Yes. And we have agents and we have departments and we have, people constantly coming out of this. And sometimes it's not like all the time. Like I work with a specific vulnerable population, like their vulnerabilities, their vulnerabilities are exposed, right? Mm-hmm. So they have criminal backgrounds, they have addiction, they have mental health, they lack family support. They, they've already been in they have childhood trauma from sexual abuse, sexual violence, domestic violence in the home, where some of that is already normalized for them, right? Or they come from their mom is a sex worker, the familiar trafficking goes on and it's just easier. But then we have so many layers in the state of Utah where like our kids are being groomed at a increasingly rate online, right? And so we have like ICAC, that's investigation crimes against children, and that no evidence or statistics in the state of Utah would be crazy for you guys to look at that department, right? But in getting them to come out of their home and leaving their safety, and then they're being groomed or sending pictures and exploitation, and that is going on at an increasing rate in the state of Utah. And obviously we have our, recent cases is like people buying homes and offering these girls coming out of prison, and we're going to give you an apartment, but now you have to set up dates and you get an allowance, and those have been huge busts in the state of Utah. And then we have low-end hotels or traffickers that have control, or drug dealers that they have this area and girls have to come with so much, and then they get their allowance of drugs, or there's profitable, right? But globally, like trafficking is $1 billion industry, and probably part of the problem is Western society. We have some sick fetishes. Like we have some disgusting fetishes. Like we think
little
2-year-olds are attractive.
Utah, this is going on. Wow.
I think it goes on everywhere.
Yeah.
But back to the healing part, I think there needs to be long-term healing for these women and children.
Yes.
Especially if you started as a child and you go into it as a woman and you're coming out. These treatment centers they're not reaching the traumas that these people have been through, and they're not in there long enough to really break the egg.
Yeah, you're right. And so I have to send most of the women that I work with, I have to send them out of state. Yeah. So I have to pay for their flight, get them an advocate, get them assessed, have another advocate pick them up from the airport. And those programs are anywhere from, like, those women can stay anywhere from a year to like 3 years, right?
If Utah had programs like that, you wouldn't be shipping them other places?
No, I would not. I mean, some do need to leave, right? Like, this is too triggering, traumatic. Right. They have no safe space. Their trafficker actually hasn't been prosecuted. There's multiple people involved in that ring. And so going around and there's ways to get that influence, like, hey, don't testify. Hey, we'll offer you. So most of them do go out of state at this moment. And there's incredible programs out of state that only works for traffic survivors. So, and that they have like these programs where they end up in kind of working as a survivor and like build these like really cool avenues for women to get into school and learn these trades and like be successful and have confidence and get their teeth done or whatever those things are that make you want to come back out in the public. Because even for me, like, my story is so, like, that happened when I was a teen, right? And then I got into the life by being, you know, I wanted to sell myself, and I thought I was cool, and I thought I could make my own money, and nobody is going to take this from me. And recruiting, and I recruited a lot of other women into this, you know, it's traumatizing industry, right? And I sometimes forget, like, for me, like, going into stores is very triggering, right? Like, I don't know who's around the aisle. Like, I don't know who's around the aisle.
Talk about this before.
Yeah, and or if I'm in a crowded place, like, I don't know what man's walking through, or a certain smell or a cologne that can paralyze me in this space where
Still.
I'm like, that I am scared, right? And I recently just celebrated 17 years in recovery, right? You know what I mean? And I feel like that's pretty cool because there's not a lot of women with long-term recovery.
I know. I look up to you so much. I just love you and the work that you do.
I'm going to just like do a little like dance because like I don't see a lot of women with long-term recovery, right? And I know I came in a long time ago and there is women with that 5-6 years, but like some don't make it past that like 10 or 12 or 15. And those are hard years, right? Like, because you get comfortable, right? You get comfortable here. And we forget to continue to do the work and
continue to do the healing.
Yes. And so I still have my own trigger responses, you know. Airports, a lot for me, you know, going into other states because then that is not familiar for me, right? And so certain demeanors or actions or reactions can always, and like that is survivors all the way around, right? Like they've either been taken or, you know, there is that story. It's not always like the movies, but women have been, right? And kids have been absolutely kidnapped, right? And so that fear of being in public and safe and at the park, and that could happen to you again, that is for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't go away.
So you think these triggers are going to last forever?
Right.
With you?
Absolutely.
Wow.
I just do different work, right? Like I am like, have safety places, and I get to leave the store if I feel triggered. I get to call someone. I have an amazing boyfriend that goes in the store and just watches me spiral out and then and then laughs at me and then's like, hey, are you ready to leave, right? And whatever those things are. But it's so cool to go home and know that you didn't take that as a place to relapse, right? You didn't act on those triggers. You are still safe, like you have a support system, like to know that all of those things are in place, like it's an incredible place to be.
Does Soap to Hope need any help? Or do you have millions of dollars and you can do whatever you want? I just thought I'd throw that out. So.
No, we do not have millions of dollars. Building a nonprofit is probably the most incredible mountain I've ever had to climb, right? And the most trying. I had no idea that you had to have so many things in place.
That's
right?
why I admire you so much, because you went through all that
Yes,
stuff.
and I think there's a lot of grassroots nonprofits that are super cool and incredible, impactful, but they just don't know those things. And I'm like really self-taught, self-driven. Like I would look up like what checklist you need to have if you wanted to go for federal money. Like what do you have to have in place? Hey, what kind of webinars? What kind of grant writing? Like I'm gonna get on YouTube, and like I have a manic disorder, like. And so like staying up late watching all these things and like staying up in the morning and going all crazy with them was really impactful for me. But like we still, as a harm reduction program, like there's lacks funding, right? A lot of money goes, like even if there's homeless money or that like goes into the shelters, it doesn't go to the boots on the ground, grassroots programs, which those programs need them, right? And I have been able to win money and get federal funding and state funding and get grants and like have incredible people in our lives. But it's never like, I've never won like billions of dollars and people are like just throwing money at us. So we always need in-kind donations, like donate on our website. If you are someone that has those type of talents, grant writing, any of those, like, please get a hold of us. We would love to, you know, get involved. And we had incredible people get involved and write us, and we've won some. But we definitely have cool things throughout the year as fundraisers or clothes drives or, you know, safe sex kits drives where, like, we need condoms, we need supplies, we need these boots on the ground, basic hygiene stuff that we need as an organization. But and we have our big fundraiser coming up in December that I love that event. It's so
excited
impactful.
for that event.
Yeah, this year is pretty incredible. The survivor that's flying in from out of state that's been out there from our outreach with another mentor of hers, so she's safe and doesn't be at a hotel room alone, all of those things. And over the years that we've had survivors that have come out from Canada or Vegas or, you know, St. George that are willing to share their story so people know there's so many myths about trafficking, and there's so many different layers of what exploitation or trafficking or grooming or targeting or being in the life or fleeing the life means, right? There's so many words. People still
what are the
use
predominant myths?
that it only happens to girls, right? Boys get trafficked too, right? Or it only happens overseas, right? In third world countries, and it's these poverty and they're being sold for, like, it is happening here. Like, there's so many, you're held hostage. That is untrue, right? Like, there's a lot of myths in that. Like, some are not, right? Like, but people still look at trafficking as this, like, they see it on mainstream, one girl's story, or they see it in a movie, and then they say, oh, that's not happening here because we don't see that. Right?
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So that gala, our annual gala in December, is huge for us to raise money, bring money in. Tickets will be launching tomorrow, and sponsorship has been incredible. And so we're just working on that. Helps us stay afloat through the year.
How
So
do
somebody
people
wanted-
find out about? Were you going to
I
ask
was
the same thing?
question, yep.
'Cause
We're on the same path.
Yes, it's soap to
Yeah, number
the
two, hope.
hope.
Yeah, and it's like we have a website. A lot of our, like, I think a lot of our presence too is mostly on social media, like Facebook. If you get on our Facebook page, like, we have all of our events and what's going on, and like actual giving these people, humanizing them. Like, we humanize their story. Like, when we meet them and we're doing wound care or seeing them, you know, going into programs, or that they just got raped or sexually assaulted, or someone, like, we humanize them and share their story without exposing who they are, but we tell their story, not ours, not what we did for them, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right,
just what.
right.
And so our social media, our Facebook is a really cool place to just go see, like, the real authentic pieces of who we are. So a lot of our events, the gala, the launching, or like when tickets go on sale, will be mostly on Facebook. We do have an Instagram. And then, but yeah, our website, like, and even on our website, there's really cool podcasts that I've done over the years too with other survivors and being on their podcast. And it's been really cool for you to get educated here. And get educated on our UTIP task force website in the state of Utah. It talks about human trafficking. It talks about signs. It talks about how to protect your kids. Maloof Foundation is a really good one for parents with online grooming and predator, and like
Which I'm sure is at an all-time high right now.
Yes, and you will have amazing resources for your kids that are even like 4 and 5 that are that can't leave this
Yeah.
space, right? Our ICAC, like UTIP, is Utah Trafficking in Persons Committee, and I threw a fit. Just so
You? You did? No way.
That's hard to believe, isn't it? This calm,
Yeah,
reserved,
they-
quiet little woman.
Yeah, they did they did an operation at a hotel that one of the very first hotels that I started knocking on the door, and there was probably about 40 girls in there being exploited and living and selling themselves and, sex work and this owner. But that operation left a lot of those women like homeless and no resources and traumatic and like exposed. Like they even exposed some of the women's names in the article and on the court documents, and those women were targeted and beat up, and like he had a lot of power, right? And so me and my sassy ass. I don't even know if I can use that word. It's kind of, but anyways, yeah. I
You can use the F word all day. That's very good.
I emailed the Attorney General's office, and I lost my ever loving mind as a survivor.
Did they agree with you?
Oh yeah. So but that moment started change, right? And so they started the first ever Victim Services for Human Trafficking subcommittee under the Attorney General's office, and I'm the co-chair of that. And
Wow.
So they have a survivor at the table with a criminal background and addiction background, and at chairing that committee there's probably about 15 other organizations that are on that committee that help. That deal with polygamy, they deal with youth, they deal with the criminal justice system being trafficked when they get out, and with Journey of Hope, and like there's Pacific Islander, like they have something culturally, like we have people from the Hispanic culture that are on there for women to have barriers, or men are coming out of the life. Like it's an incredible organization where we offer resources, and then we invite people to teach us about their resources so we can expand more victim services for human trafficking in the state of Utah. And that all started because
you threw a fit.
Yeah.
Good job.
I was
A January fit. Yeah.
I know we need to come up with a good name for it. Best in state.
We are out of time, believe it or not.
Oh,
but
okay.
My hat's off to you, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Destiny. You're an amazing woman.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all you do. So if you want to find out more about it, soap to the number hope.
Yep.
.com or
UT.com.
Soap to hope UT.com.
Yep.
Thank you, January.
Thank you.
Thanks, Destiny, and thank you for watching another edition of Odyssey House Journals.